Hi, Katie.
Hey, how you going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really well. Yeah. How's your business plan coming along?
It's coming. I'm building a little like a presentation deck just to have all the information together all in one place. Actions and some goals, exactly what we were talking about in last session. Uh,
Yeah.
it's sort of like each slide, it's a little bit of like a mini session of what we do each week. So it's also like a little bit of a summary and also like a little bit of an action point as well.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm so glad that you're progressing with it. How are you feeling about it?
I think the more I pour myself into it, there's a little bit of confidence building from the back of it as well.
Yay, that's good. That's good. I'm happy to hear that. That's really good.
And I've mentioned it to a couple of people as well. So it's amazing how like once you start talking about it, it just kind of the wheel starts turning and you're like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, this can actually happen. Like it can be very tangible. So
Yeah. Beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that. That's so good. You've just given me a thought, which I'm popping in the chat so I can remember to talk to everyone about it too. All right, give me a second, guys. I just want to look something up so I can share it with you.
hey, Annika.
All right, let's jump in. I am assuming that more people are going to join us. People, in fact, they are already. Here they come. Welcome. Beautiful. Welcome, everyone. Hey, nice to see you all. All right, I'm going to jump in straight away because there's lots of things I want to share this evening. And as always, I want to allow some time for questions at the end. So this evening, we're going to talk about branding, and we're going to talk about sort of where and how you position your business and your expertise. And there's a couple of resources I want to share with you. I know that when you join, you don't get the chat that's been shown previously. So I'm just going to cut and paste these again and dump them in here. Before I go into talking about branding and my ideas about branding, I want to reference a couple of people who've been really important in terms of influencing me as far as cultivating my brand is concerned, and not in the ways that you might necessarily think. So at the moment, I'm doing a course with a woman called Kelly Deals, who I love. She's phenomenal. She is a person who is genuinely creating original work. And I think in this day and age, to create original work is basically impossible. Like, we're all so influenced by social media and everything that's going on around us that a lot of what we do is just kind of regurgitation, even completely subconsciously and without intention, of what other people are doing and saying. She just, I don't know, like it's like she's just channeling it from somewhere else. The course I'm doing with her at the moment is called, I can't remember exactly what it's called. Her courses have really kooky names, but let me see if I can see it. I can't see it right now. It's something like the Feminist About page. So it's basically a whole course, and it's just short, about writing your about page, like, you know, the page that you have on your website that is about Katie and then all that stuff. And she calls herself a culture maker because she's very interested in like how we represent ourselves and our work in the world. And basically she says that everyone's about page is just a boring version of the same kind of thing, and never makes the person seem very interesting or exciting, or really tells you very much about them at all, other than, you know, what qualifications they've got or not got, or that kind of thing. So she put this whole training together it's not cheap. Like, she's not cheap, and she talks about that a lot. She does some money stuff around how, you know, she does like charge quite big prices because she puts so much energy and effort into her work. And when you do any trainings with her, you'll see it's really content rich. Like, there's a lot there, so it's actually good value, but it's not inexpensive. I got it on a sale. She had a big sale a few weeks ago, so I didn't pay full price. I paid less than half price. However, she has a lot of really inexpensive and free stuff, so I definitely recommend checking out her website. Her free trainings are really good. But the thing I wanted to share about her feminist about page, and I'm not going to even go there with the whole idea of feminism, that's like another conversation, but it's basically an about page that's interesting and dynamic and alive and original, is that she really invites us to step away from our qualifications and step into our value as a human being. And I love this. I think this is so important. Like, for example, I can write an about page that says, you know, I'm a doula and a mother of 5, and I've been teaching yoga and Ayurveda for 25 years, and I work for the Australian Doula College, and I write for Yoga Journal, and, you know, all that credentials, published by Rockpool, blah, blah, blah. That's what my about page looks like. I'm rewriting it at the moment on the back of doing this course. Her invitation is, write your about page about what your superpowers are. I mean, of course, you can include some stuff around what your qualifications are, etc., etc. But like, what is the thing you're really good at? So as I'm writing mine, I'm thinking about things like, okay, I'm really good with words. I love words. Words are my passion. I'm articulate in speaking. I'm good at writing. I can copywrite quickly. I can manipulate and play with words very skillfully, very fast. So that's already like one whole part of my about page, is like, I love words and I work with words and I relate to words. And then she asks you to give an example of how that manifests in your work. And so I gave the example of, you know, as I'm still working through this process, but I created a course, which I think a couple of you have done, around chapter 3 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it's called Yoga Sutra Alchemy. And it basically breaks down chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras, which is very esoteric and weird and difficult to access. Like, it's pretty out there. And most people that read it don't get it. And a lot of teachers don't teach it because it's weird. And I've spent years studying this chapter and really thinking about how it applies in my life, and then created a course off the back of that. And when I think about the work that I do, that is like a real example of my skill set, like to be able to go into something that's quite academic, quite dry, quite weird and esoteric, and then pull out the meaning for myself and then translate that meaning for the women I work with. And actually, when I think about, and I'm just thinking out loud as I'm saying this, when I think about my teachers, like if I think about Sharon Gannon or Maya Tawari, my 2 main teachers, that's their skill set too. So I've naturally been drawn to teachers that have that same kind of skill as me. So I'm writing my about page with about this. I'm writing about those skills and that course and how I developed it, rather than, you know, I went to university here and I did this course with this teacher, because anyone can write a list of those things. But like, when Liz talks about her experience of running vintage clothing stores and what that taught her and what she then brings into her photography practice, or when Tracy talks about her business where she used to make products that were sold in David Jones, and then how that translates into her fermentation work. That's when people wake up and they go, hang on a minute, this is interesting. Like, this is a story about a person and it has meaning, rather than just, you know, I learned to do fermentation with the school of blah, 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 blah. So especially if you're feeling like I'm not qualified, you know, if you feel like I don't have the qualifications to do the thing I want to do, like, who am I to? If you have any of those feelings, reframing around qualifications versus skill set, right? It's not about what qualifications you bring. And I'm not saying qualifications don't matter. Like, I've spent my life studying yoga and Ayurveda. Like, I believe they do matter, but they're not the only thing that matters. What actually matters is the skill set you can bring. Like, I was talking to a friend about Edwina today. Who was it? I can't even remember. I tell you what, my memory, it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's totally gone. It could even have been one of you. I literally don't even remember. But anyway, I was talking to a friend about, oh no, it wasn't one of you. It was another friend of mine who runs a crystal business. And we were talking about social media, and I was saying, I get a lot of help with mine and Edwina does it. And then I was talking to her about why I value working with Edwina. And, you know, part of it is because Edwina's really good at what she does. And we have a very similar sort of vision in terms of aesthetic. But actually, one of the really valuable things to me about working with Edwina is she's really quick and she's not fussy. And that to me is worth its weight in gold, because we can just workshop something. She doesn't ask me a million questions. She knows when to ask me, but she also knows when to just take initiative and do something. And we've just found a working relationship where that works so well for me. And I think that's a great selling point for Edwina. Like, yes, her work is of quality, but the fact that I can engage with her and go, this, and this, and then she can produce it, and then she can say, does that work? Or I'm unsure about this. And then it's done. And she knows when to ask, and she knows when to just go ahead. And of course, that's evolved over time, but it evolved very quickly and effortlessly. I reckon Edwina should be including that on her sales page and bio. You know, I have a superpower for nailing your vision efficiently without lots of toing and froing, and we'll get the job done. As another example, it's got nothing to do with, did she go to graphic design school? How many different clients has she worked with previously? You know, like, I do care about those things to a certain extent, but actually what I really care about is getting the job done. So I think you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. Same with Bryony, with the working with the spas. You know, today you left me a message, and you said lots of really beautiful things, but one of the things that stood out for me was you said, oh, because I don't have the experience. And I immediately wanted to reframe that for you and go, okay, but you have all these other things. And actually you do have loads more experience than you really realize, but you've got so many different skills that you're bringing to the table that the experience is almost irrelevant. Okay, you've never done this before, but you've done so many things in the area that you're wanting to offer that you have a lot more experience than you realize. So yeah, who are you as a person, and what do you bring as a person, as opposed to what qualifications do you have, and what kind of, where did you study, and how much like time have you spent doing it? Because most businesses are results based in some way, and that's actually what people are wanting to get. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah. And I really got that from Kelly Deals. So if that kind of piques your interest, I recommend you go to her. The other person I wanted to share with you today is a teacher called Hero Boga. And I recommend, as an introduction to her, go to the Practice You podcast, which is Elena Brower's podcast, and find Hero Boga. It's a very unusual name. She's of Indian descent. Her first name is Hero, and her surname is Boga. When you go into the Practice You podcast, find the interview with Hero Boga and listen. If this interests you, what I'm about to say, listen to that, because that's where you'll get a lot more of understanding. So Hero is another real pioneer in the world of business, and I think is genuinely a very original teacher. And she talks about, and it took me a while to really get this, so if this doesn't quite land for you straight away, just sit with it, because it took me a while, but this is very relevant to the branding conversation. She talks about how every business, and even within every business, every offering has its own spirit or its own soul. In fact, she actually calls it a deva, which is a Sanskrit word because she's of Indian descent. Deva is like an elemental being. So they're things like, they're mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. The devas are like, I think of them as like little angels or little fairies. Like they're little, and I say little because they're actually described as being small, like pixies, or like elemental energetic presence that help us in the work that we're doing. So the way that it's described very simplistically in the Gita is, it's like there's the supreme personality of God, which is Krishna, who's overseeing and doing everything. But Krishna can't do everything. He needs helpers. So the devas are like the minions, and they take care of the little individual things. Like, for example, when you're like driving around, as I was in the rain this afternoon, and you're looking for a park, and you're like, oh, parking gods, please help me find a good park. You know, I want some good parking karma right now. Krishna's probably not taking care of that because he's busy with like wars and, you know, big stuff. So the devas are like, okay, all right, it's your lucky karma day. Here's a parking spot for you. Like, they deal with the little bits and pieces, right? In shamanism, that would be seen slightly differently, and you might talk about spirit guides, similar type of concept. Regardless of whether you believe in all of that or not, that's sort of not the point. But Hero speaks about your business and the offerings within your business as having their own deva, having their own energetic angel, their own presence, their own imprint. And I think this is really helpful when it comes to branding. Like, let me give you an example in my own business. When I was creating Bhakti Business, which I'm currently in the process of kind of birthing, this is like the prototype. And Edwina and I were talking about what will Bhakti Business feel like compared to Bhakti Rose. And we both agreed that it's like Bhakti Rose, but a slightly less girly, slightly less feminine, slightly more grown-up version, right? So that's like the kind of deva. It's like the energy. It's like Bhakti Rose is only for women. It's very much in the feminine. It's quite girly. There's a lot of pink. It's very much my expression of the feminine too, like what I enjoy in that kind of vibe. And then Bhakti Business is going to be open to both genders. It's about business rather than Ayurveda and yoga. So it's still aligned to its sister brand, but it has its own deva. It has its own energetic imprint and body to it. And so the colors that we're using, and even the fonts, and even as I'm writing copy for the website, the language is slightly different. And so there's two things I find really helpful about thinking about your business as having its own spirit or its own soul or its own deva. The first one is this: it detaches you a little bit from the business, and it means that you're not so caught up in your own personal identity and self-worth and relationship to self with your business. So, for example, if you put something out into the world and people don't buy it, then it's not like you have failed. It's like this particular deva, this particular energy, this particular offering didn't quite meet its target, right? It didn't quite fly on this occasion. But it doesn't mean the whole business is wrong, and it doesn't mean that you as a person are in some way wrong or flawed. It just means that particular energetic imprint at that particular moment didn't quite land for people. And I've had loads of those over the years. And sometimes I have them where I put something out and I can't understand why people don't want it, because I love it so much, or I think it's so amazing. And then people just don't quite get it. And I'm like, okay, they don't get it, you know, and that's okay. And you'll always know if people get it or not, because they'll buy it or they won't buy it. It's a very simple feedback system. And then other times where I put something out a little bit half-hearted, or I kind of think, oh, maybe this will sell, maybe people will like it, maybe they won't. And it just, I mean, like this business offering, honestly, hand on heart, was one of those. It was like, okay, a few people have asked me, I'm going to throw something together. Let's see if there's interest. And then it's just become something so much bigger. So it's got its own deva now, right? It's got its own energetic imprint. It has its own presence. Even something like a WhatsApp group has its own deva. It has its own energetic persona, right? And it's very helpful to start thinking about parts of your business and your business overall in that way, because it will help you to be less emotional. It'll help you to make better decisions, because you won't have the same level of attachment. You'll see it more for what it is, rather than investing parts of yourself within it. And if that is of interest to you, if that makes sense or it resonates, I very much recommend go and listen to Elena interviewing Hiro Boga, and you'll get a lot more of that. And her work is really, really beautiful. So as we talk about branding, these are the things I'm thinking about. This is what branding means to me. It's like you bringing the essence of who you are and the essence of a particular offering that you want to birth into the world. It's the absolute opposite of generic, easily replicated offerings that anyone could do, right? So I really believe the businesses that are going to be successful in the future are the ones that have a personal brand attached to them, like a personality. And it doesn't mean the personality has to be you, but the brand has a personality to it, right? It's not just something that's sort of generically being created. Heidi, maybe it was me that missed the second thing. So the first thing was that it helps you to be separate from your business. I think I didn't say the second thing. Thank you. The second thing is that it helps you to get really clear about what the offering or what the business is, right? Like Bhakti Business is Bhakti Rose's grown-up sister. Like that. It gives you some clarity around what it is you're offering. Like maybe Annika might say, Maya Movement and Nin Yoga, you know, they're sister businesses, but they have, I'm sure she could articulate a different energetic imprint, a different energetic presence. Different people are attracted to them. The branding might even be slightly different, but the feeling, the vibration is definitely different. So it allows you to create some divisions in your business and look at your business as sets of offerings, and then also have some clarity around the overall identity. And branding works like that. So you might have like an umbrella brand that has then different facets within it, different things that you do. So for example, you might have a brand, and then within the brand, you might do in-person workshops, and you might sell products, and you might do online workshops. But they all come under one umbrella. And then sometimes it makes more sense to splinter off and actually create a different umbrella. I try to avoid doing that because it's a lot more work. Like you actually really want to try and keep everything under the one umbrella as much as you can. But sometimes you really need to make a differentiation. Like Bhakti Business, I really wanted it to be separate to Bhakti Rose. They're two separate things, because not everyone that studies yoga and Ayurveda with me is interested in business. In fact, most people aren't. So they need to be two separate entities. But within Bhakti Rose, there's lots of different things that I do, and it's all under the one umbrella. So within Bhakti Rose, I've got, for example, Ayurveda Goddess, and I've got Yoga of Birth, and they both have their own devas. They both have their own branding, their own style, their own language, their own energy. And you might think about your offerings in the same way. And again, they're not me. Ayurveda Goddess and the community of women in that program, and the program itself has its own energetic presence, and it's created by me and supported by me, but it's not me. It's its own entity. It has its own vibration. And if that sounds really esoteric, you can think of it literally just like branding. I mean, I just discovered recently, because my 16-year-old, I think I spoke to you guys about this recently too. My 16-year-old just got a job at Target. So he's going to be working at Target. And so he gets all these different staff discounts now. And he gets staff discounts at Bunnings, Officeworks, Target, Kmart, and one other big one. And those companies are basically all owned by the same conglomerate, which blew my mind. Like, that's half of Australian retail right there. And so, of course, they've all got their own individual brand identities. Officeworks isn't Kmart, and Target isn't Kmart, although they're very similar. And I find it really hard to tell the difference. To be honest, I don't understand the difference. But so you can see they've got their own separate branding, but it's an umbrella company. And you can do the same thing within your organization as well. One thing I wanted to mention in this vein is that we are definitely heading towards, and if you haven't come across this, you will very soon, artificial intelligence, AI, doing a lot of copywriting and creating graphics, and it's amazing and frightening all at the same time. In Kajabi, which is a software system that I use for my business now, AI is alive and well and active. I mentioned this last call. And they, you know, for sales pages or for emails, they'll now offer to have a robot write it for you based on the content you've already given them. I think we're going to be saturated with even more words and content and images. It's just content, 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 right? But if it reads like AI wrote it, it's not going to sell anything like as well as if it reads like a human being with a story wrote it. So when I talk about how I created the Yoga Sutras training because of my fascination with chapter 3 and the weirdness of it, and the fact that I couldn't find any teachers that were really explaining it to me, and that I spent years studying it and blah, 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 people want to sign up for that because there's a story behind it. Whereas if I just said, I'm running a training on the Yoga Sutras, we're mostly going to focus on chapter 3 and blah, 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 and it sounded like AI wrote the sales page for that, maybe it's interesting to some people, but it's nothing like as interesting as a story that only I can write. So when you're writing your sales copy, when you're writing your website blurbs, when you're writing your emails, when you're writing your sales pages, workshop descriptions, whatever it might be, I want you to reread them, and I want you to ask yourself, could artificial intelligence have written this? Does it sound so generic and vanilla that it could have been written by a clever robot? And if the answer is yes, go back and add yourself into it. Tell me a story about you and why you are the person that will bring this to life for me. I'm not saying you have to take all the other stuff out. I think the other stuff is probably still needed and important and relevant, but it shouldn't read like it could have been written by, you know, you just gave the data to artificial intelligence and it wrote it for you. And if you don't know what I'm talking about with the whole AI thing, honestly, you will soon. Like it's coming really fast. So avoiding general language, avoiding generic language, avoiding cliches, you know, avoiding the same words that everyone else is using. And the thing that makes this hard is that it leaves you a lot more vulnerable. Like you're being asked to give more of yourself. But I really think that's where the gold is. I think that's where the healing happens. I think that's where the transformation happens. I think that's where people will come to you rather than going to anyone else. And I think that's what the future is going to be all about. You know, partly people say, oh, the future is going to be about robots and artificial intelligence, but actually it's going to be about people and human stories, because that's the backlash. And with that said, and this is a continuation of this branding conversation, part of what your brand is to get really clear, specifically clear on what you include and you don't include about your personal life. So I'll tell you about my brand. I do not name my children. I don't tell stories or anecdotes about my children unless they're in very general terms. I don't show my children's faces on social media. And I don't usually use daily anecdotes as part of the way that I present my brand. I do a bit, but it's not like, I'm not like going onto Instagram stories and updating you with, oh, I just went to the supermarket and this happened. And then, you know, oh, I came home from the supermarket and then this happened. And like, that's not how my brand is. And that's quite intentional. I only use music in my social media that has a yogic or a spiritual context. I don't really use humor, although I like to think I could be funny if I want to be, but you know, like I don't put like little GIFs or like a dancing teddy bear or that kind of thing. Like that's not my brand. My brand's a bit more serious than that. I have a color palette that I stick to. It's really important to me in my work that I'm acknowledging the traditional custodians as well as the yogic lineage. That's a big part of my brand, which doesn't mean that I'm using them to sell. It just means it's important value within my business. What else do I do or not do? Edwina, you might have a, I don't know, that's probably the main things. When you have children, a lot of it's around the decision about how much you're going to share on that. Pets like personal stuff. Some people create a whole brand around themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be that transparent, you can totally do that. Like Edwina and I did a in-person event recently with a group of women coaches, and the woman who ran it, Kate Scudder, is a very successful coach. She makes a lot of money, and her content is really good. Oh yeah, not a lot of photos of me. That's true. And I've put a lot more recently, but I don't want it to be all about like, here I am on my laptop, and here I am with a latte, and here I am with my dog. I don't have a dog, but yeah, that's not my vibe either. Kate Scudder, like, her social media is the main driver of her business. And it's basically, if you follow her on social media, it's like you're just following her around in her day. I mean, she is updating every, I don't know, couple of hours. Like, I know that at the moment she's flying from Australia back to Maine, which is where she lives. I know what her children look like. I know what they had for breakfast. I mean, it's like a lot, right? So and I spoke to her about this. I was like, oh, I'm really interested in your decision to be so transparent regarding your family. Like, I'm much more private than that. And she said, well, it's obviously a very conscious decision. She's running a multi-million-dollar business. She knows what she's doing. And she said, it just makes me really relatable. People really love it, and it works really well for my brand because they can see that I'm running a busy, successful business, but I'm also juggling kids and doing all the things. I mean, she even talks about arguments she's had with her husband, I'm assuming with consent from him. Like, it's a lot. Like, you get a lot of her, and you do feel like you know her. It's quite strange. When I met her, it was quite a weird sort of like, and she must get that a lot, sort of like being famous, but I guess that's what it is to be an influencer. And no matter how much my business grows and expands, that will never be how my brand is, because I value my privacy way too much. And I also value the privacy of my children. I think it should be their choice whether they're splashed all over the internet or not. But again, you might have a different perspective on that, and that's completely fine. What I'm inviting you to do is have a position, make a decision. So is your Instagram some of your personal life and some of your business? Is it only your business? Is it only one element of your business? Like, not just what's the content that you're sharing, but what's the way in which you're sharing it? How often are you sharing it? All of this is part of your brand. It's part of the deva, the persona of your business. And there's as much in there around what you don't do as there is in terms of what you do. So it's not just about what you're choosing to put out there. It's also what you're saying, no, I'm not going to do this. These are things I'm not going to step into. And then, of course, a big part of branding is things like creating a color palette, creating some imagery that you want to utilize, sort of like having some sort of consistency so people can recognize you. Like, I have a signature font that was drawn for me by a beautiful yogi, and a color palette, and like, I have clear brand guidelines about the way that I use language, and all of those kinds of things. And they'll evolve as your brand evolves, but it's really useful to think about them from the beginning, because then you don't have to go back and reinvent the wheel. People being able to recognize you quickly is really helpful, because that means that when they see you in other places, they connect the dots, and that will increase sales. I'll tell you something interesting on brand consistency if you think you think that's not true. And then I'm going to open up to questions. I run a sale every year on Black Friday, and it's usually the biggest week of the year for my business in terms of income. And usually what I do is I send emails out to my existing audience, the people who are on my database, and then I run Facebook ads to people who are not in my database. And Facebook is clever enough to do that. It can filter out people that are already in your database. So you're not promoting to people that are already in your world. And my logic around that was, why would I run Facebook ads for people who already are in my business that I'm sending emails to? They know about the sale. It's a waste of money, right? And then I spoke to a branding expert just before I did the Black Friday sale this year. And she said to me, no, 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 you're making a big mistake. People need to see it in 2 or 3 different places to remember and to then buy. She said, actually, the most important spend will be advertising to people who are already buying from you, already in your programs and already in your database on Facebook. So then I did a small campaign, and some of you may have even seen this, where I ran the ads specifically tailored for my existing audience on Facebook, even though I was already sending them emails, which again, to me, doesn't make sense, and almost doubled the sales from my existing audience by doing that. Have I explained that in a way that makes sense? Yeah. So basically, by showing it to you on Facebook and sending you an email, you're twice as likely to buy. Obviously, this is all happening subconsciously, as you are if I only email you or I only show you on Facebook. And that's brand consistency. That's like, oh, I meant to sign up for that when I saw the email, but I forgot. And now I'm being reminded over here on Facebook. Or, oh, it looked really good on the email, but I didn't sign up because blah, blah, blah. But now the Facebook ads really caught my attention. So maybe I will sign up. And we all do it. We behave like this as consumers. So having a bit of consistency across your different socials, across your emails, in your in-person branding, even in the courses and workshops and the papers, like the paperwork that you put out, like PDFs or workbooks or whatever, all of that creates an imprint of the data of your business, and it's important. All right, let me open up to questions, comments, thoughts. Where are we at with branding? Talk to me about how it's going, what you're thinking. Do you feel like it's consistent? Are you a bit lost?
I have lots of ideas. I just sort of got to work how to put them all together.
Yes. Yeah. I think the best place to start is with like very, very simple brand guidelines. Like, I'm going to use these colors.
Yeah.
I'm going to use this font, and I'm going to post in this particular way. One other thing, and I didn't say this, is just as the AI wording on things like websites and stuff like that doesn't really capture people's interest, in general, graphics that are based around templates also tend to be the same. Like, you'll actually get far more traction from a personal picture of you doing something, even if it looks less perfectly curated, than you will from, like a graphic that you've used in Canva that looks very, very professional and schmick, but just looks quite generic. It doesn't look like something that tells much of a story. So the sort of era of like the very professional brand is not, that used to be a thing. These days, actually, people care a lot less about that and a lot more about like being able to connect with a person. Bryony.
Just with the story, how much do you recommend to kind of share? I've got my sister-in-law, she's got a cleaning business, and she claims that she's a mother of 4, but she claims that she's a recovering alcoholic. I think she used to binge drink like everybody did in their 20s, and then just stopped drinking before she turned 30. And she's now got a cleaning business, which is quite successful. But it's that story that is published in just everywhere, in the Daily Post. It's even in the UK that story's reached. So what's your take on how far do you go with your story, which I agree is important?
Yeah, a couple of things. One of the things that Kelly Deals said, which really interested me, and I hadn't really thought about it very much before, but I liked it and it resonated, is she says that she's not a fan of the rags to riches or the complete transformation story. So she describes, and I agree with this completely, that we're all on a journey constantly of evolution and growth. Although we might have turning points in our lives, it's very rare that we actually have a life that has a before and an after. right? So if you present your narrative and your story as a before and after story, it's not really reflective of the depth or the subtlety of who you are as a person. So for example, when a coach says, oh, I went from being bankrupt and having no money whatsoever, and then I founded my coaching business and now I'm a multi-millionaire, which actually, that's a bit of the Rachel Rodgers story. And that's one of the things I don't love about Rachel Rodgers.
That's a lot of people's
Definitely
story.
does this. Yeah. It's not usually true. Like usually there's years of work in between and there's like ups and downs, you know, it's a roller coaster. It's not like just a before and after. Okay. Even when there is quite a strong before and after story, like let's say, for example, weight loss, if you see, you know, a before and after picture and it's a radical transformation, there was still a process that person went to in losing the weight, right? It was a journey. It wasn't a moment to moment thing. So what Kelly Keel says is we're much better. It's much more nuanced and much more helpful to share parts of the journey rather than the rags to riches or the kind of transformation story as a just like short and sweet delivery. Although people love it and people are very drawn to it, it's not the most honest way of speaking about yourself, because we're all in transformation all the time. So I'm still thinking through that myself, but that was quite resonant for me when I learned about that within Kelly's work. And then in terms of how much to share or not to share, honestly, again, that's part of your brand. You make the decision about that. For some people, it's everything. Like they'll share everything, you know, all the gory details to the point where it can become quite narcissistic. And then other people are very, very private. You know, I read a book recently. I can't remember what it was called. It's published by the same publisher that I'm working with. So I've been reading a couple of their books to just get a feel. And it was a great book. It was really good. It was a personal development book about meditation, but it had so little of the author in it that I felt that by the time I'd read the book, when I finished, I understood the meditation technique really well, but I was really craving to just know a little bit more about this person's journey with the technique. Like it just, the author was missing from the book, you know? And so for me, that was too much. Like, I was like, come on, give me something. Tell me a bit more about who you are. And I've personally, like, I'm naturally pretty private and I'm British too, which we're much more reserved in general. I've grown much, much, much more as I've been teaching over the years into sharing like my own stories and my personal life. And like, this is me in my much, much more open version. I used to be way more private, not because I had anything to hide, but because I just really felt like this isn't all about me. Like, I don't want to make it the Katie show, you know? Until I realized actually I'm withholding so much that people just really want to know a little bit more about me and who I am and how I live and, you know, how I apply the teachings in my life. And so then I started to share more because I could see that it was helpful. So another way I would answer your question, Bryony, is the story I'm sharing helpful? Does it tell people something that could be transformative? Does it, like the Orchard Street story I told at the end of last week's call, so inspiring, such a helpful story. I would 100% be sharing that story again because I know that it's transformative. It's not just based in ego and kind of like, look at me, I'm so great. That's really different.
Katie, random question. I'm just thinking, as someone who has, you know, been trying to figure out her brand for like 5-6 years, it goes through waves. So sometimes my brand will be doing this thing and then it changes, and then created my movement that was completely separate, and I was like, oh shit, I should have just made it under that umbrella because now it's confusing and all this kind of stuff. When you keep making these changes, because what I'm learning, does this hurt the brand? Does that make sense? Like, yeah,
it does. And the honest answer is it can hurt the brand if you don't have some consistency. So my suggestion would be create some real umbrella rules, right? Some real umbrella clarity. And then there can be changes within that, but you don't want to be really reinventing a lot. Like I've done damage to my own brand and my own work in the world through, for example, just a name change. When I got divorced, I went from Katie Minitzers to Katie Rose. Oh my God, it like really harmed my brand because people were like, who's Katie Rose? Where's Katie Minitzers? What's happened? And that's obviously like an unavoidable, like I changed my name because I got divorced, but it does create confusion. I'm still living with the legacy of that now. People think it's two separate people and it is confusing. So things like colors and fonts and particular types of graphics and imagery, you do want to like at least for some time stick with them. I mean, imagine if Coca-Cola or McDonald's changed their logo. They never would, because it would just be an absolute disaster, but they'll play with it, or they might do certain things under it. Like a McFlurry might have different branding to a cheeseburger, but McDonald's, they're not going to change the golden arches because we need to recognize them. So yeah, you can still play and you can still be creative and you can still do different things, but your umbrella, you want clarity, because you're going to put so much work into creating a website, creating all these different offerings. You know, why would you then keep reinventing the wheel? It's energy, it's time. Like, yeah.
I think when I first created, I created the studio before I created the name of the studio. Like I was signing the lease before I even had a name, and I had to think of a name fast. So I just called it Nin Yoga because that was my high school nickname, Nin. And I was like, I'll change it later. Like, I don't want it to be called like, sounds like I'm calling Annika Yoga. And now it's like 6 years in, and I was like, shit. And I feel really embarrassed to tell people that story, that it's just like, it's nothing spiritual or like, it's just my nickname.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say either, because there's parts of my business where I have that, we all have that too, like little areas of our business where we're like, oh, it's so cringy, I wish I'd done it differently. Either just embrace that and know that it's part of being in business, it's part of evolving as a human, and let the embarrassment go because it doesn't serve you. Or I'm trying to think of an example of that in my own business right now. Nothing's coming to mind, but I know they exist. Or change it. If it's really something you don't want to live with and it makes you feel icky every time, then it's worth it. It's worth the change. But yeah, one way or the other, you're going to accept it and you're going to live with it, and the embarrassment is gone because there's no time for that energy. Or, okay, I really don't like it, I really can't live with it, I'm going to change it.
Yeah, just be quick.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I want to say about branding too is people get very caught up in just a logo, and a logo is part of your branding. A logo is important and it's how people will recognize you, but it's not the be all and end all. Branding is much more than a logo, and actually colors are more important than specifically just a logo. So just thinking a little bit broader beyond like just a logo, it's the visual colors. One of the ways that you can really create clarity around that too is if you want to use filters. So you can, like, for example, if you're using lots of different photographs, but if you use a similar type of filter on them, it'll create brand consistency because it will give the filter, like, let's say it's a filter that makes it a little bit more warm, or like I tend to use a lot of pinky rosy type of filters on my photos. And I'm not talking about filters that make you look prettier. I'm talking about like the actual, like, you know, it could be a picture of a oil burner or, you know, whatever. But that sort of slight consistency across the color tone, that can be really helpful too. Liz.
Adding to that, you just thought that maybe I could add that to my photo offerings, because I do that, but I never thought to explain it to a client, where I will, if I see them face to face, I'll say, look, I create your very own filter for your image so that all your photos are consistent and recognizable for you. Because I used to shoot a lot of cafes in Noosa, and it was like, well, that's what I did for them, but yours is going to be completely different. So you couldn't actually,
a massive selling point. And actually,
I never thought
explain that. That's huge.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna have to like put that in words. Thank you so much.
Yeah. That's a huge selling point. Heidi.
Yeah.
Katie, do you have a view on this? And it's I've been advised in the past that when telling your personal story, to identify the pain point, and I know you spoke about the transformation, about before and after, here's where I was, here's where I am now. And I know when it came to me, like for me personally, I could identify things that could have created a lot of pain, but for me, I didn't. But I found myself thinking, okay, well, I'm going to try and create what I think people would experience as a pain point with that. But it actually is not a pain point for me, but for the purposes of conveying a story, that was the advice that I was given. Do you have a view on identifying a pain point and using that as your personal story?
I honestly believe anything that you put out that isn't 100% authentic will never be as successful as when you just speak from absolute authenticity. So it might be for you, Heidi, in those particular stories, that actually what the narrative is in this particular example, I know many people would have suffered for a long period of time and found it to be extremely, painful and difficult. But I found myself to be a very resilient and robust person. And I think I can teach you resilience and how to be robust, because that's one of my superpowers, right? So rather than like, I'm down in the trenches with you and we're struggling together and I can help you because I know the struggles, you can actually say, I can help you because this is something that comes easily to me, or this is something that I've overcome gracefully. And I've got tools that I can support you with in doing that. In other words, I'd say always be honest, always be honest. Don't amplify a struggle, and equally don't downplay a struggle either. And everyone's struggles are valid. What seems really petty and insignificant to one person might feel really like heart-wrenching to someone else, and vice versa. Like we all have our Achilles heel of things that just hurt, and then other things that we're actually really robust around. So I don't think there's ever a need to sort of exaggerate a pain point, because I'm sure in your life there are things that are painful for you and that cause you suffering, and so you can speak to those. And then the things where you don't struggle, in fact, I can give you an example. So the book I'm writing at the moment is about trust, and I've always been an extremely trusting person, like naively trusting in the past. I'm a bit better now because I'm a grown up, but like I was the kind of kid that would get pranks played on them because I would just believe what the person was saying. Or, I'd jump into relationships, or I'd sort of throw myself into go traveling on a whim. I once trusted a friend who said, we'll go on a holiday to Thailand. And then 2 weeks later, I was in Vipassana, which is silent meditation, in the middle of the jungle, surrounded by snakes and rats, not able to speak. And I was like, wow, I really just trusted this person to like take me on a nice holiday. I thought I'd be in like Phuket on the beach with a cocktail. So, I'm a jump in with 2 feet kind of person, right? So in writing the book about trust, I actually had this thought. It's interesting that you asked this question, because I had this thought when I started writing the introduction to the book. I was like, maybe I shouldn't be writing a book about trust, because trust comes really easily to me. So shouldn't I be writing from a perspective, like, shouldn't it be the person that finds it really hard to trust, that's learned how to be trusting, that writes this book? And then actually what I kind of workshop within myself is, no, I find trusting really easily. It comes naturally to me. So I'm in a great position to support other people with that, because it's a superpower of mine. It's a skill. I'm naturally trusting, right? And so, yeah, we can come at it from the unhealed, or we can come at it from the healed. And we'll all have different versions of that, other things that we find easier or harder or whatever. But not just to Heidi, to all of you, the minute you step out of being inauthentic, you step into being inauthentic, amplifying a pain point, downplaying a pain point, you're not in your integrity. People can feel it. The Deva of your business can feel it. When you start mucking around with that stuff, it's like when you're in a relationship, and you just start being a little bit dishonest, or like what do they call it? Micro cheating, where you're like, I don't know, having a flirtatious text with someone else or whatever it might be. People can feel that, even if they don't know it, they feel it. And so my suggestion would always be keep your energy very clean in your business practices, because it will come back and bite you on the ass if you don't. And also, people don't buy because they can feel there's something not quite right here. Same with pricing. Like if you say the price used to be this and now it's discounted to this, don't lie, don't inflate, don't exaggerate, just tell the truth. This was the price, this is the new price. Or, you know, like I sometimes see these sort of value bundles with such vastly inflated like previous prices that you just think, really? Like it used to be $2,000 and now it's $2. It doesn't feel right, you know? So yeah, it's never going to create a good vibration. Thank you for asking that. It's a brave question. It's an important question. Anyone else? Edwina, I wonder if you want to speak for a moment about where some of your inspirations for branding come from, because I know you said to me yesterday that you'd just been to the Gallery of New South Wales and that had given you lots of inspiration. But as someone who creates, you know, branding palettes and vision boards and mood boards for people, where could we look for inspiration?
Oh, that's a great question, Katie. It's interesting. I was thinking, as I was at the art gallery, I was thinking, you know, where does the inspiration come from and how does it happen? But I think a lot of my inspiration comes from, like we were talking just now, is energy and nature, and really trying to, I guess, understand the energy of a brand and a person behind that brand. That's where a lot of the inspiration comes from for me. But also surrounding myself with beautiful things, following beautiful accounts on Instagram and you know, that sort of thing. Having, you know, I've got lots of coffee table books and fashion, because I've been in fashion before for most of my career. So that's always been a huge inspiration for me. Travel, you know, traveling overseas, India. I've just, you know, I'm looking at Mexico, you know, places like that give me lots of inspiration. And I think you'll probably see that throughout my branding as well. And I was just thinking before, it's been fun rebirthing Shakti Creative, because it's it's similar to my brand, but very different as well. And I've been able to have a lot more fun with that in a really bright, sort of fun, vibrant way, a shiny kind of way. Whereas my yoga and Ayurveda is very much, you know, my garden and nature and that sort of inspiration, I guess. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's sort of where I get it from. It's from sort of everywhere. And I think it's a lot of inspiration as well comes for me with my, you know, with my sadhana practice as well, with my meditation, with my yoga. Like I ask source, you know, a lot of it comes in that way as well. So I know if I'm feeling really, what's the word? Like if I'm just really in my masculine and I'm just like ticking off the to-do list, and I can feel that I get very stuck in business and in my creativity. And it's when I sort of get back into my body, get back into nature, into my garden, you know, into even mothering and doing all of those things. Like I feel inspired, if that makes sense, like getting out of that four walls of just sort of sitting down and having to, you know, do. Just it's, you know, that loosening up a little bit. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, I was just thinking as you were speaking, it might sound to some of you guys like the whole branding thing is a lot of work, but the truth is once you've done it and you've got clarity around it, it will save you so much work, because every time you create a page on your website, put out a new offering, send an email, you know, any sort of promotional material, social media posts, you've got consistency. You know what you're doing. You don't have to keep thinking each time, oh, how do I do this? What graphics should I use? What pictures should I use? Like you've got, it's there, it's set. So it actually makes it easier. It's a bit of work in the beginning to save work over time. Yeah. Liz, I wanted to ask you, because we have had a couple of interesting conversations about avoiding cliched branding, like the whole idea that, you know, yoga teaches it should all sort of be like neutrals and beiges, and we were talking about Victoria Washington, whose branding I love, which is so different to my own branding. She's a like yoga teacher and coach, and she uses a lot, like you, a lot of dark, I knew you'd love her, a lot of dark colors and gold and like very, very different vibes. So I wondered what you would say about like, yeah, like avoiding the sort of tendency to cliche, or the feeling that, oh, because my brand is this type of product. Like, for example, let's say with Kay, because a lot of the work she's doing is Indigenous connected, does it have to be an Indigenous artist? Does it have to look like something we'd immediately think of as being like Aboriginal illustrations or imagery? Like, what do you think about that?
Oh, thank you, Katie. I have had this conversation so much with clients, which is photography clients, which is why I've incorporated branding into my packages, because often they would come to me and, oh, like it's an Indigenous artist, did you say she was?
Yeah, so Kay, who's in this group, a lot of the work she does is with Waiapa, which is connected to Indigenous, you know,
yes,
practices. I'm just using that as a random example, but like where there's an immediate cliche where you think, okay, this is what it should look like because it's this.
Yeah, 100%. I often have people say, okay, so I've got an idea of what I should do, and then they'll show me a collection of inspiration that is people that are in their exact field. And I will say, okay, that's amazing. Just let me, like, tell me about you. So you want to, recently I shot a coffee table book about an off-grid family just out of Taree, and she had all these farm photos and all these books, and she's like, I want to do it just like this and just like this and just like this. And I was like, cool, so what's your book about? And she told me about her extraordinary life. And I said, where do you live? On this farm, but the farm's not finished yet and it has to be a perfect house like this photo. And I said, you know what, let's, like, she wanted to go to other locations to shoot, and I said, the beauty is going to be in your real life, in your house where you are at now, and that's what we're going to capture. She's like, I spend all day in the garden. I'm like, I'm going to photograph in your garden. She's like, what should I wear? I'm like, you wear what you wear, and maybe we'll just tidy it up a little bit, you know, maybe we'll brush your hair into a pony as opposed to just throw it back into a pony, but you do you. And as a photographer, I'm like a voyeur, so I like to view people and capture their life as opposed to set it up, and that's really important for me to capture that authenticity. Yeah. And I have found that without making a huge plan of exactly how it's going to look, that it will organically unfold. And I think my excitement in that allows them to have a little bit confidence to give it a go, and it's always just organically unfolded. So what I would say for the Indigenous work is, like, I think it's really important to share the story around the connection to the Indigenous culture, but in your own way, as opposed to thinking that you have to do it in a way that, okay, well, the government shares their information about Indigenous people this way, so it has to be like this, or this artist does this way, so it has to be like this. Take your personal inspirations and express them like how you would under your own roof, and how to your friends, and not worry so much about what you think you should do because everyone else is doing it. I had a huge demon that I had to fight going from being in fashion and into the yoga world, where I just, for some reason, I was telling myself that I had to transform to a barefoot beige yogi. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I was just like, do I have to change? Like, you know, am I going to be accepted in this industry if I'm wearing heels and I like to go out and wear makeup and I like to listen to music that isn't necessarily always yoga music? And when you showed me Victoria Woods, I was just like, wow, like, you can combine, you can be this modern woman and be in the wellness realm as well. And it wasn't that I wanted to look at Victoria Woods and be like, that's what I want to do, but it just, her doing her gave me confidence to be me. And my first experience with that awakening, I guess you could say, is when I had Gypsy Stone. And I would share on my blog quite often why it is that I do what I do. So many people would come to me and say, I want to do what you do, and I want to do it this way, and would dress the same way, and just started imitating. And I was just like, what's going on? Like, this wasn't my intention. my intention was always to inspire other people to be confident in their own skin and expressing their own style as well. But yeah, somewhere it got misinterpreted and it became that whole like, I like the vibe, and people weren't reading the vibe and the energy. They were just thinking, if I do it, if I imitate you, then I will get the same results, when it's not actually that what they're wearing or what they're saying that's getting them the results. It's their authenticity. So it's really finding that authenticity, the why it is that you do what you do, and then finding a way to express that visually, which I would do through images and sharing your story through photographs. And then someone like Edwina would then step in and can add in graphics and color and do all of that to create your visual package.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And sometimes it can just be like one item, like one teacup or one piece of jewelry or one picture that just is the thing that creates the foundation that everything else then in terms of the branding kind of feeds off. So yeah, it doesn't have to be too complicated. Thank you for sharing that. And I would definitely echo that the best inspiration I've had in my business, and this isn't just in terms of branding, this is overall, is stuff that comes to me when I'm not comparing myself to others or looking to external inspiration. Like I definitely have my best ideas in the shower or in bed at night, which is really annoying because I'm trying to sleep. But the self-originating ideas are always the best ones rather than the ones that have like come from someone else. Yeah, or somewhere else. Heidi, was there something you wanted to add?
It was a question around to Edwina around the work that she does in her inspiration, and maybe even to you, anyone who this resonates with. And it was when you're taking your inspiration from different places, different countries, do you come across questioning yourself or doubt around cultural appropriation or misappropriation? And then if so, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. Personally, I am very careful not to use any sort of imagery or graphics that aren't resonant to my own personal ancestry in a way that makes it seem like they are. That's the most important thing. So it doesn't mean I can't wear fabric from India or jewelry from Mexico or whatever, but if I'm trying to pass myself off as having Indian heritage or Mexican heritage, that's where the problems arise. So we can appreciate and celebrate from other cultures and include them within our branding, absolutely, but the appropriation happens when you're trying to use it to give the impression that that's part of who you are and where you're from. A good example of that in yoga world would be to use deities or icons, religious icons or imagery that you then imply that they're part of your own lived experience and heritage. And it gets very subtle. I don't think we should say, oh, I can't borrow from any other culture or be inspired by any other culture. But I think we need to be really, really mindful of acknowledging where it begins and ends in terms of our own lived experience.
And just in response to that, in terms of the Waiapa, with me, I would be leaning into the elements of Waiapa rather than the Indigenous artwork itself, because I am not First Nations to Australia. But, potentially leaning into my own ancestry.
Yeah, beautiful. That makes complete sense. And actually, that's what I was thinking about when I was thinking about your branding. I was thinking, yes, like it's stuff that connects to Australia as the land rather than specifically Indigenous practice and Indigenous art. That makes total sense. All right, ladies, I'm going to call it a night because I can hear my baby crying in the other room. But I would love to continue this conversation. And you've got in this group two amazing branding wizards in the form of Edwina and Liz. So if you are looking to get support with branding with your work, then obviously I recommend both of them. They've both worked with me and for me on my brand. So they're both wonderful and incredible and part of this group. So it couldn't be a better fit. And I also want to really invite you in the WhatsApp group to share. Let's see some of your ideas. Let's see your colors. Let's see. I know Bryony's been sharing, which has been really lovely to see, and getting feedback. So, you know, feel free to spam us with your ideas and pictures and images, and let's keep the conversation going. Have a beautiful evening. Thanks, everyone.